When we talk about the most hated characters in the history of television and literature, few names carry as much weight or evoke as much genuine physical disgust as Ramsay Bolton. He was the kind of villain that made King Joffrey look like a spoiled child throwing a tantrum. While Joffrey was impulsive and immature, Ramsay was a calculated, high-functioning psychopath who viewed the human body and mind as nothing more than a canvas for his personal art of suffering. In the world of Westeros, most characters are driven by standard motivations like gold, land, or the Iron Throne, but Ramsay's primary drive was the sheer joy of watching the light go out of someone's eyes. To really understand how he became this monster, we have to go back to his origin story, which is even darker in George R.R. Martin's books than it was on screen. Ramsay was the product of a horrific crime. His father, Roose Bolton, was out hunting when he spotted a miller's wife. Roose decided to exercise an ancient, illegal custom known as the First Night, where a lord could claim a commoner's bride on her wedding night. Roose hanged the miller under a willow tree and raped the woman right there beneath his swaying body. A year later, that woman arrived at the Dreadfort with a baby. Roose only acknowledged the child because the boy had the cold, pale, grey eyes of a Bolton. From the very moment of his conception, Ramsay was surrounded by death, violence, and the cold indifference of a father who only kept him alive out of curiosity. As Ramsay grew up, he wasn't raised in the castle like a noble. Ramsay's mother once again brought him to his father, but this time years later, claiming that she needed help in raising the boy who grew up wild and unruly. Roose sent Ramsay a servant known as Reek. Reek, despite taking constant washes, always smelled awful due to some unknown birth condition that caused his skin to reek, thus his nickname. Giving Rick to Ramsay and his mother was actually a cruel jest by Roose, but Ramsay and Reek then grew inseparable. Now, this is not the same Reek that we see Theon Greyjoy be forced to take on. Despite Roose's instruction to Ramsay's mother, either she or possibly even Reek informed him of his true parentage. Roose believed that both Reek and Ramsay's mother were urging Ramsay on, constantly reminding the increasing bastard of his rights. While most bastards content themselves with their lot in life, Ramsay had larger ambitions. One of his first major crimes, and perhaps his most personal one, was the murder of his half-brother, Domeric Bolton. This is a huge piece of lore that the show didn't spend much time on. Domeric was Roose's legitimate heir, a young man who was actually kind, talented, and well-liked by everyone. In the books, Domeric wanted to meet his half-brother despite Roose's warnings that Ramsay would kill him. Domeric went to find Ramsay because he wanted a brother to bond with. Shortly after they met, Domeric died of a mysterious stomach sickness. Roose is absolutely convinced that Ramsay poisoned him to clear a path to becoming the heir of House Bolton. This wasn't just about power, it was about Ramsay's deep-seated obsession with being recognized as a true Bolton. He developed a violent hatred for the word bastard and would kill anyone who dared to use it, proving his insecurity was just as dangerous as his cruelty. Ramsay's transition from a background threat to a central villain happened during the fall of Winterfell, and this is where his genius for manipulation really shows. While his father, Lord Bolton, is in southern Westeros during the War of the Five Kings, Ramsay begins amassing troops at the Dreadfort. When he receives news that the neighboring lands of House Hornwood have lost both Lord Harley's and his heir, Darin, Ramsay attacks, taking the Hornwood Keep and forcing the widowed Lady Donella Hornwood to marry him. He rapes her, forces her to sign a document proclaiming him Lord of the Hornwood, then locks her in a tower without food where she starves to death after even eating some of her own fingers to stay alive a little longer. Ramsay practices rape, murder, and other crimes around the lands adjacent to the Dreadfort, gaining quite an infamous reputation. Sir Roderick Castle attempts to put an end to his atrocities after Ramsay caused the death of Lady Hornwood. Roderick's party comes across Ramsay shortly after he raped and killed a peasant girl. Ramsay is able to survive, however, by switching clothes with Reek, who was killed in his place. Roderick yearned to put Ramsay, disguised as Reek, to death too, but he needed him as a witness to many of Ramsay's crimes and brought him to Winterfell. In the show, he is simply sent by his father to retake the castle from the Ironborn, but in the books, his plan is much more complex and terrifying. While everyone thought the real Ramsay was dead, he was actually living in the Winterfell dungeons in disguise. He spent that time joining the Ironborn forces and was whispering in Theon Greyjoy's ear, pretending to be a loyal servant while slowly poisoning Theon's mind and leading him toward his own destruction. He quickly becomes one of Theon's most trusted attendants, even assisting Theon in his hunts to bring the escaped Bran and Rickon Stark back to Winterfell. He orchestrates Theon's cover-up of the Stark boys' escape by killing 2 peasant boys of a similar age, then flaying the corpses to avoid recognition. Theon presents their flayed corpses as the Stark boys, then has their heads mounted on spikes over the castle walls. After Theon becomes overwhelmed by the attack from the Northmen, he reluctantly agrees to have Ramsay leave with a huge sum of money in return, with the much-needed reinforcements from the Dreadfort. Ramsay and his forces march to Winterfell, where Sir Roderick Castle and his hosts move to greet them. Ramsay has swapped his serving man's garb for a full set of armor. As Castle offers him his hand in friendship, Ramsay slices Castle's arm off and leads his forces in a rampage through the stunned Northmen's ranks. Ramsay rides to the Winterfell castle's gates and presents the corpse of Sir Roderick to an unlocking Theon as a sign of his loyalty. Theon opens the gates and meets with Ramsay himself, who removes his helmet and reveals his true identity. When Ramsay finally reveals his true identity, he doesn't just take the castle, he burns it to the ground. He betrays the Ironborn who thought he was their ally, murders the Stark loyalists who came to save the city, and takes the women and children back to the Dreadfort to be tortured in his private dungeons. This brings us to his most famous victim, and perhaps the most prolonged act of torture in modern fiction, the breaking of Theon Greyjoy. The show gives us a front-row seat to this nightmare. But the books describe a level of degradation that is almost impossible to process. Ramsay didn't just want to hurt Theon, he wanted to erase his soul. He started with physical mutilation, famously castrating Theon and sending the proof back to the Greyjoy family in a box. But the physical pain was only the beginning. He would flay the skin off Theon's fingers and toes, leaving the raw nerves exposed to the air. Then he would leave Theon in a dark cell for days until the infection became so painful that Theon would actually beg Ramsay to cut the fingers off just to end the throbbing. Ramsay would act like he was doing Theon a favor by amputating his limbs. By the time Ramsay was finished, Theon's hair had turned white, his teeth had been smashed out with hammers because Ramsay hated his smile. Ramsay had broken him down psychologically, and he forced Theon to take on the role of Reek, his slain manservant. In the books, Ramsay never allowed Theon to bathe and covered him in excrement. He forced him to live in the dog pens, eat rats, and forget his own name. If Theon even tried to remember he was a Greyjoy, Ramsay would flay more skin off his back. He sends a small piece of skin to King Robb Stark as a gift to show vengeance is being exacted for Bran and Rickon Stark's apparent murders. Ramsay's father, Lord Roose Bolton, murders Robb at the Red Wedding, and afterward, House Bolton is rewarded for their service to the Lannisters, with Roose named Warden of the North. He also received a decree of legitimization from King Tommen Baratheon I, making Ramsay now Ramsay Bolton instead of a bastard, Snow. Ramsay then captures Moat Cailin from the Ironborn by sending Theon in as an envoy. He promises food and safe passage to the sick and starving islanders if they surrender. When they do surrender, Ramsay has all of them with the exception of Theon, flayed alive, and displays their skinless bodies on poles along the road by the Moat Cailin. Ramsay's cruelty toward women is a consistent theme that highlights his predatory nature. Both in the show and the books, he treats people like literal prey. He kept a pack of hunting dogs that he would use to hunt young women through the woods for sport. This wasn't a quick kill, it was a game of stamina and terror. If a woman gave him a good hunt by running fast and fighting back, he would name one of his dogs after her as a sick tribute. If she didn't provide enough entertainment, he would simply let the dogs tear her apart while he watched. In the show, we see this happen to a girl named Tansy. He hunted her alongside his mistress Miranda, laughing as the girl begged for mercy. It shows that Ramsay didn't just kill out of necessity, he killed because he found the process of hunting and catching a human being to be the ultimate form of entertainment. And then there was poor Jane Poole, who was forced to marry the monster. In the show, this storyline was replaced with his marriage to Sansa Stark. This was a massive turning point in the series, because it took a character the audience had watched grow since childhood and placed her in the hands of a monster. Ramsay systematically abused Sansa, using her as a political tool to solidify his hold on the North while forcing Theon to watch every moment of the trauma. It was a move designed to destroy whatever dignity Sansa had left and to keep Theon under a state of permanent psychological submission. Ramsay's list of crimes continues with smaller, but no less terrifying, acts of violence. He flayed the skin off an elderly woman in Winterfell simply because she tried to help Sansa. In the books, the situation is slightly different but equally dark. He doesn't marry Sansa, he marries Jane Poole, who is a childhood friend of Sansa's being forced to pretend she is Arya Stark. The abuse Jane suffers is even more graphic than what was shown on television. Ramsay would force her to perform horrific acts with his dogs and subjected her to constant physical violence. He delighted in the fact that everyone in the room knew Jane was suffering, but was too afraid of his reputation to step in and help. This is the core of Ramsay's power dynamic. He creates an atmosphere of pure, paralyzing terror where no one feels safe enough to be a hero. Ramsay's thirst for power eventually led him to commit the ultimate sin in Westerosi culture, which is kinslaying. In the show, when Roose Bolton's new wife, Walder Frey, gives birth to a healthy baby boy, Ramsay realizes his position as heir is in danger. He doesn't hesitate for a second. He stabs his own father in the heart right in front of his advisors. Then he leads Walder and the newborn baby into the kennels. In one of the most chilling and quiet scenes in the entire series, he watches calmly as his hounds tear his stepmother and infant brother apart. He didn't just want the title of Lord Bolton, he wanted to ensure there was no one left on Earth who could ever challenge his claim or remind him of his status as a bastard. In the books, Jane and Theon were rescued and freed by Mance Rayder, whom Jon Snow had sent to rescue his sister when he heard of the wedding to Ramsay. Although Jane and Theon escaped, Jon receives a raven with a message purportedly from Ramsay, claiming that he has Mance Raider and has defeated the Northern Army. The letter also claimed that he has killed Stannis Baratheon in battle, and he now possesses Stannis' sword. Ramsay also states that he wants his bride back, as well as Queen Selise Baratheon, Princess Shireen Baratheon and his Reek, that is Theon Greyjoy, and he will come for Jon if he does not give him what he wants. Now, whether the letter actually came from Ramsay, and which part, if any of the letter's contents are true, still remain unknown since Ramsay loves to play mind games. Now, that is the last of Ramsay's appearances in the books, so in order to discover his fate, I'm now going to move to speaking about what happens in the TV show. Now, of course, there are some inaccuracies between the books and the show, the main one being that it's not actually Jane, but Sansa Stark who becomes Ramsay's bride. And that letter Ramsay sent to Jon was, in fact, stating he had Jon's brother Rickon and wanted Sansa back by his side, which leads to the Battle of the Bastards. Here is the thing, Ramsay's tactical cruelty extended to the battlefield as well, proving he wasn't just a mindless sadist but a brilliant, evil strategist. During the Battle of the Bastards, Ramsay proved he was a master of psychological warfare. He brought out Rickon Stark, the youngest surviving Stark boy, and told him to run toward Jon Snow's army. Ramsay didn't just shoot him immediately with an arrow. He toyed with him, firing arrows that purposely missed to give Rickon a false sense of hope. He waited until the exact moment Jon was close enough to almost reach the boy before piercing Rickon's heart. This wasn't just a kill. It was a move designed to lure Jon into a blind rage and ruin the Stark battle plan before the fighting even started. It worked perfectly, forcing Jon's cavalry into a trap. Even within his own ranks, Ramsay was a monster who had no loyalty to his own people. During that same battle, he ordered his archers to fire into the frays, killing hundreds of his own soldiers along with Jon's men. Most commanders try to preserve their troops, but Ramsay saw human beings as nothing more than raw material. He wanted to create a wall of corpses that would literally trap the enemy army so they could be slaughtered like sheep. To him, his men were just tools that could be broken and discarded once they served their purpose. He even killed the giant 1-1 with a final arrow to the eye at the end of the battle, not because he had to, but because he wanted the satisfaction of killing the last of a species. He was a man who lived for the moment of impact, the moment when hope dies and fear takes over the human soul. Ultimately, Ramsay met an end that many fans felt was the only fitting conclusion for a man of his nature. After being beaten into a bloody pulp by Jon Snow, he was locked in his own kennels. He bragged to Sansa that his dogs were loyal and would never hurt him, but he had forgotten one crucial detail. He had purposely starved those dogs for 7 days to prepare them to eat the Starks. In a final, poetic bit of justice, the very monsters he created and trained became his executioners. As Sansa watched with a cold, hard expression, the hounds began with his face, ending the reign of the most sadistic man to ever walk the North. Ramsay Bolton remains a fascinating study in pure, unadulterated evil. Whether it was the calculated political murders of his family, the systematic breaking of Theon Greyjoy, or the random acts of senseless violence against the common people, he represented a level of depravity that changed the entire tone of the story. He wasn't a villain you could sympathize with or understand through a tragic backstory. Now that we have walked through his entire list of horrors, I want to hear from you. Which of Ramsay's moments do you think was the absolute peak of his cruelty? Was it the psychological destruction of Theon, the betrayal of his own father, or his twisted games during the Battle of the Bastards? While you are at it, make sure to subscribe and hit that notification bell so you don't miss our next deep dive. Thanks for watching, and I will see you in my next video.